If you have not put your cell phones on mute or turned them off, please do so now, because this is being recorded and the recording equipment picks up the sound of a cell phone faster than it picks up just about anything else on earth, including what the candidates are saying. All right. Are we all here? There are some seats in front for those of you who are standing in the back, if you would care to be seated. The rules for this debate are very similar to the debate that you just sat through. The candidates have drawn numbers for the order in which they're going to respond to the questions. There will not be an opening statement. The first person to respond to each question gets 2 minutes to respond, and all the subsequent answers go 1 minute. I will give the panel members an opportunity to rebut if they feel they need to at the close of each round of questions, except that in this case, the rebuttal can only go for 30 seconds. And there will only be, again, one rebuttal per candidate this morning, period. So once he or she has used up his rebuttal, that's it. That having been said, I would like to go to the first question immediately. And there are about 4 or 5 of you in the audience have asked this. I'm going to go with one version of it, but these are budget questions. When the Board of Ed budget is approved, it is, in effect, a blank check. More money is being spent on administrative or overlay positions rather than resources directly impacting students. Test scores are down, school ranking is dropping. What are the issues and what needs to be done with the budget to reverse the negative trends? And this one goes to Mr. Esses first.
I'm Steve Esses. I'm the current chairman of the Board of Education, for those of you that I don't know. So you should just understand that under Connecticut law, once the education budget is approved, it's the number that's approved, not the line-by-line spending, although we do get, as we do put the budget together on a line-by-line basis. It's reviewed on a line-by-line basis. It's reviewed by the Board of Selectmen. It's also reviewed by the Board of Finance before it's approved. This question on administration comes up frequently. It comes up frequently. I served on the Westport Board of Finance for 10 years before I moved to Weston. I've served on the Weston Board of Finance for 10 years before I asked to be considered for this position on the Board of Education. I don't believe we have too many administrators by any means at all. I actually think we have the requisite number of administrators that oversee our school system. I also believe we have the requisite numbers of administrators in our schools. And I think as we go through this debate, you're going to hear, because the questions will come up, about how we are addressing the testing scores, how we're addressing improving the school system. But we're improving an excellent school system. I don't want anyone to believe and walk away from here that we have issues that they should be concerned about how their children are being educated. You're going to hear how we're going to enhance that over the course of this morning.
Okay, Candidate Ferraro.
First of all, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Sharon Ferraro, and I'm also an incumbent member of the Board of Education. I've been on the board for the last 2 years. I agree with basically everything that Steve said, and I want to add a few things in here because he was just getting to the tip of the iceberg, and that is that the outcomes for the schools as we see them now, the way that the question was phrased seems a bit misleading to me, and in as far as it sounded as if we have a sinking ship that we're on, and that's not at all the situation. We have been working with the new superintendent for the last 2, now 3 years, and she's been a member of the staff in Weston for nearly 40 years now. She knows the system, she knows exactly what needs to be done, and I believe fully in that she is doing exactly what needs to be done to keep this school as a top performing school.
Okay, Candidate Felton?
So the way I look at the question is, with declining enrollment and our costs going up, how do the two go together? Not so much academic outcomes. We all know that on the Board of Ed, our #1 responsibility should be any dollar budgeted to the Board of Ed should be a dollar directly attributable to an educational outcome of one of our students. Shouldn't be for administration costs, it should be for those that educate directly our students. And there's going to be administrators to run the district, there's going to be teachers that need to educate our children. So I think the real question being asked, which we have to dive into as a board, which starts with having the willpower to really look at all of our costs, is why is enrollment going down, but our administrative costs are going up, and our educational outcomes are in decline? And that's something that the Board of Ed really needs to dig into as a group and examine why.
Mr. Hefner?
I'm going to frame this about the way the question was framed as well, which is this. It was labeled as a downward trend on two factors. One, the test scores, and two, the rankings. Now, anyone who's been paying attention, the rankings in this country are very questionable. If you look at what U.S. News and World Report has about their rankings, a bunch of it for colleges is simply based on the reputation of other colleges saying what this college is about. Test scores, in general, across the country are not being used as a final measurement for a school. So what I would put to you, to the residents of Weston, is not actually getting hung up on what our test scores necessarily are, which, by the way, they're not that bad. They're actually quite strong. The thing you get hung up on is what is the actual curriculum in these schools. There's not that much wiggle room within the actual budget. We have to be focused on how we're educating our kids for the future, how they're being trained to use technology, how the reading curriculum, which we're changing for K through 2, is actually a huge step in the right direction, and what's happening inside the schools as opposed to fighting about numbers, which, by the way, are probably not as relevant as you might think.
Mr. Guido?
Great, thank you. I want to thank League of Women's Voters for holding the event. I want to thank all of you for joining. I want to thank everyone up here, obviously, on the dais for participating. Look, I agree and disagree with some of what was said. Weston undoubtedly remains one of the best school systems in Connecticut. There's no doubt about that. However, as the question states, there are some worrisome trends, right? Decline in test scores, as well as this decline, this precipitous decline in school rankings. Now, to a point that was just made, sure, methodologies, of course, can be challenged, right? Nothing is perfect, and there are flaws in all of them. But what I've found in sort of assessing schools and being around, of course, education my entire life, is that typically when the results don't bear, sort of the outcomes that you want, you question methodology. So I think at the end of the day, we need to pay attention.
Time, I'm afraid.
We need to pay attention. These things have a real impact on attracting families, recruiting talented educators, and of course, reducing any misallocation of resources
That's time. I'm sorry, that is time.
when
Gotta
investing in our
watch the
schools.
sign.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, all the audience, and thanks my both incumbents and our new candidates to the board. It's a very responsible job. In fact, it fundamentally connects the will of the community to the education of our children. It greatly affects the decisions we collectively made, the livelihoods of the employees, the quality of the students, and the social and economic well-being of the residents. That said, yes, the budgeting process is taken quite seriously. We put about 3 months into it. We recognize the issues and the implications of our spending. We take our fiduciary responsibilities very, very seriously. And there are methods and new capabilities and curriculums we're putting into place, particularly for K through 2 reading and middle school math. But it really comes down to a few things. One is the skill and what we bring as a board to the problem at hand. Thank you,
Okay,
folks.
I'm afraid that's also time. Mr. Gutton?
So, also, thank you, Weston League of Voters, Women Voters, for hosting us this morning, and all of you for joining. I'm a first timer. I'm running now, thanks to some good friends in town who positively encouraged me to do so. And I think Mr. Gordon was alluding to it. The main reason why my wife, who's in the audience, and me, we moved here, as many of you all have done, and many of my peers, and why they're staying in town and want to stay in town. is the school system, obviously. I learned recently that Weston used to be number 1 and 2. Now Westport is number 1, and we're somewhere around number 12. The Weston School District is still one of the very best in the state, clearly, as some of you have pointed out, and we're very proud to have our children go to school here. But we do have to do better. I say that as a taxpayer and as a parent, we need to invest in our schools wisely, and for me, that means investing in education more so than newer buildings, cutting-edge programming, and bottom line, the best teachers.
Okay, and that's time also. Thank you. Is there anybody who wishes to rebut on this question? All right, the next question will go to Ms. Ferraro first. What are your priorities to improve school facilities?
That's a really big question, and that's a really hot topic here in town. And I have to be honest with you, the priority that I see is I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert. I'm looking forward to hearing what the experts in education and engineering have to say about what's going to be best for our students, about what's going to be best for educating our students in the future as education evolves. And I'm looking forward to making sure that when we do address this issue, because don't get me wrong, it absolutely has to be addressed, that we do so in a responsible way, that we are working with everyone in town. And let me remind everyone in this room that this decision is not made by strictly the Board of Education. We can make a recommendation, but it's the town that actually decides whether or not they move forward with that recommendation. As a board member, prior to making that recommendation, I will do all of my homework, making sure that what we are doing as far as the facilities are concerned is fiscally responsible. And like I said, it addresses not only the educational needs of our student body today, but the educational needs of our student body in the future. We've seen a lot of evolution as far as science is concerned, science lab necessities, various classroom regulations from the state and federal, and I want to make sure that once we have a solution, that it's going to be a permanent solution and one that everyone in town is able to stand behind.
Okay, Mr. Pelt?
So I'm going to start with the same answer I gave to the last question, which is speaks to my I'm fiscally conservative, and it goes back to every dollar that we spend should be spent directly educating our students. So when it comes to facilities, in 2017 there was a facility study done, and at that time it was known that the cost to renovate or improve the schools was about $60 million, $38 million for the middle school, and additional $30 million for the other schools. In 2021, we completed the Facilities Optimization Committee, and at that time, with no reference to any work being done at the high school or WIS, the dollar amount was just shy, somewhere north of 84 million and potentially south of $100 million. So before we get into how the buildings should look, we have to first understand how do we educate our children inside the buildings. And once we know how we're going to educate our children inside the buildings, then we can change the brick and mortar. But my students, my children rather, they don't come home from school and say, I didn't have a good educational experience today because the building is old. Their educational is based on their relationships with the teachers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hebner?
Yeah, I agree with David on the point he just made, which is this. There's a huge trap in getting hung up on what is the dollar amount for this thing we're trying to build. The point is what's happening on the inside. So if I were to look at this, I would look at 3 priorities. 1, whatever we build, whether it's renovating, building new, whatever it is, it needs to be cutting edge and state of the art. Our kids are going to grow up in a world, literally, in which all of recorded human history, all the information ever, is accessible like that. The buildings that we grew up in, the technology, the facilities we had, is not the same as they're going to meet. That does not mean exorbitantly expensive, though, either. Anyone who has renovated anything in Weston, Connecticut in the last 10 years, you know you get different bids on different things. We have to push down on price, for sure, no matter what it is we do, build or renovate. And the third thing that has to happen is we have to be unmistakably focused on what happens inside the classrooms. So we have to have classrooms that are actually able to be flexible, to be flipped, use flexible seating, use interactive things within the classroom so our kids are getting a kinesthetic education, not just an intellectual one.
Thank you. Mr. Guido?
Sure, thank you. Look, obviously one of the most pressing and controversial issues here. I sense there's a lot of frustration in the town, of course, as time passes. Estimates for the facilities seem to go up. unabated, and of course, accountability continues to shift here in town. Look, I agree with some of the prior comments. I think there are clear issues that have to be addressed, right? We owe it to the students to invest in our schools, especially the middle school, and to provide them with facilities that will promote a dynamic learning environment. I think we owe it to the taxpayers to do this and proceed in a fiscally responsible manner. What does that mean? That means probably more of a phased approach. But I think that also, while limiting impact on taxpayers, of course, allows us to remain flexible in our capital improvements so that we can remain more dynamic and deliver that sort of capital improvement and dynamic educational experience to our children.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Gordon?
Great question. I run the Educational Optimization Committee for the future planning of the town. It actually sits in my lap right now to work through all the dynamics. We have a plan. The plan includes Board of Ed, the administration, town of Weston. Clearly, it's an organic plan, a living document. We have a discipline that we're trying to abide by to account for all considerations. On my nickel and my dime, my time, I went to San Francisco and talked to IDEO, the most famous interior design company in the world. You're holding products of them, they're called your iPhone. Look what they say. Let's reallocate and reimagine the spaces and resources of our multi-building campus to address the needs of the future students, educators, and community members. It's a group effort. And when it comes to facilities, I have like this chaotic quest because I happen to be the only engineer. Mr. Pesco was the other engineer. He and I enjoyed a lot of talks, but Mr. Pesco has moved on to other issues. I'm a member of ASHRA. I'm an HVAC expert globally, sustainability, environmental. If we want to save money and have clean buildings and healthy buildings, I'm the guy to talk to.
I'm sorry, it's time.
Thank you.
Mr. Gutman?
Okay. Well, we certainly need to invest in our school buildings, but the most important investment, as I think many or all of you know, we can make is in our children, as far as our programming and our teachers. Without those, the buildings mean nothing. I believe in making wise investments in our school buildings without overburdening the Westonites with what sounds like it could be an $84 million debt.
All right. Mr. Esses?
So I was the vice chairman of the Facilities Optimization Committee, which we put together because we knew what the enrollment trends were. So I think we need to take that right off the table, that Facilities Optimization Committee is recommending spending $100 million. There's no recommendations to date. There's a study that was taking place. And when I joined the Board of Education, I asked Peter to take over the interior design of the buildings. And I agree with everyone, Chad in particular, that the most important things we can do is determine how the children are going to be educated in the four walls of whatever the ultimate building's configurations are. That's the challenge. That's the challenge that we have to deal with. We'll solve for the economic part of it. We'll solve for the cost. And that ultimately will be decided not by this board, not by the Board of Selectmen, not by the Board of Finance, but by you, the taxpayers. You'll make that ultimate decision. But we need to solve for what's going to take place inside the classroom in a dynamic environment that we're all living through right now.
Okay. Thank you all for that. I'm going to ask a follow-up question that came from the audience. It is basically, what should the role of consultants be in any school renovation planning? The questioner noted that we have experienced civilians in town who have construction background, but what should be the role of civilians versus hired professionals in school renovation? This one goes to Mr. Felton first.
So I think the question is probably recognizing the astronomical costs that we have spent in the past 5 years, 2017, 2021, on consultants to look at our facilities. I think consultants have a role in filling in where we have a void of expertise. But the question really becomes, when do you bring a consultant in? Do you go and test drive a Mercedes when your budget is a Honda? So for my purposes, I think the important question is, we should be using consultants, but we should understand what the role of the consultant is. And I'll give you an example. I was on the FOC as well. And the question I kept asking for the FOC was, what can we afford? What is a town willing to pay for? And that was never considered. The FOC's task was look at the facilities, look at where there are deficiencies, and come up with the plan. And Tecton came up with plans that I don't entirely agree with Steve that there was nothing decided. There was. At the end of the FOC, what was put forward for consideration to the next committee, which ultimately became the EOC, were two plans of 5, and the two plans that were put forward started with an $84 million price tag. Tecton was never told what type of parameters to work in. They were never told what the budget was that the town could afford. So I think that consultants play a very important role in filling the void of expertise. I think that when the town brings consultants in, that's questionable, because we spent a lot of money twice now to essentially have the same outcome. In 2017, $68 million to fix our schools. In 2021, $84 million plus. And the only people that really made out well are the consultants that we all paid for.
Mr. Hefner?
Yeah. It depends on the consultant. So the reason I say that is anyone who's hired anybody to do anything can relate to this. The question is not, should we hire consultants? We should, where we need help and where we need assistance. But we should be looking for consultants. And I'll give some real props to Peter here for his work on the EOC of sourcing this material. We should be looking for consultants who, whatever they help us do, that they're bringing a truly transformational eye to this. I'm not saying an exorbitant expensive one. I'm saying transformational. Think about the number of the waste and the excessive use of conventional thinking and how a lot of buildings get made. We should not do that. So the question is not, are we going to need consultants? We will need some consultants, but who? And right now, I think we're doing a good job sourcing some different thinking about that, but we have to be absolutely laser focused on getting the right people in that position.
Mr. Guido?
Sure. The town over the years has certainly seen its fair share of consultants in this project. I believe if my numbers are right, and you all have been much more involved than I have, but we spent, upwards of $300,000 in planning and trying to determine what this looks like going forward. There's certainly a role for consultants in this town, and I think we should heed consultants and what they're recommending. But I believe that there's probably a dislocation in the brief, right? In what we're actually telling consultants we need and what we can afford and what they're delivering. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you for the follow-up question. So the FOC did hand off a lot of documentation to the town, and we know now, at least with respect to buildings or infrastructure that's in the buildings, what needs to be refurbished, rebuilt, replaced, rejuvenated, reconfigured. That's not a doubt. In fact, the administration is actually creating a shopping list on what needs to be repaired, for example, in HVAC and other attributes to keep the kids healthy and safe in the schools. So the question becomes, where do we go from there? Well, the EOC has a plan. We actually have a working list of looking at best-in-class schools that have built good buildings, housed new programs, and have a lot to teach us that we can pick and choose from and how to then look what we want to evaluate in consultants. So there is a method to the madness. As I said, I went out and found someone who's good at what to do inside the school. Now we're looking at the actual hardware of the schools.
Thank you. Mr. Gutman?
I do like that Honda analogy. Personally, I do love Mercedes, but I've had some Hondas over my years, and super efficient and reliable and a very solid vehicle. So I run a fairly large size company, and I would say in the past 12 years, we never went outside for consulting help. We really just bred the right people internally and empowered them. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing, and I'm learning a lot here, it sounds like there's been, again, already a significant investment in bringing outside help in perspective. There might be a lot of plans that are still pretty relevant and accurate. So it sounds like we can hopefully have the right people that are internal or already on task who could leverage what the good work the consultants have already put together for us.
Mr. Esses?
So I absolutely believe we need consultants, and we're gonna hire more consultants. We have a school campus. East House was built in 1950. North House in 1965, the middle school in 1960. Now think about that. You're not gonna build a building that's supposed to last 50, 60, 70 years because you get a group of townspeople together and come up with that plan. It takes true expertise. I disagree. We have not spent a lot of money on consultants. We're making decisions that are gonna last decades, and important decisions. Important decisions not only for the education of our children, but for the town, and for all of us fiscally. And you just don't do that without a lot of planning and a lot of expertise.
Ms. Ferraro?
So I'm all about being fiscally conservative. The last thing I want to do is waste town money. That's my money too, right? I'm a taxpayer. I don't want to waste money. But the saying of being, penny wise and pound foolish comes to mind here. If we have local experts who are willing to help us out, by all means, we're open. We'd love to talk to people who are local experts who can help us out to help us save. However, I 100% believe that there is a place for consulting in this process. This is way above my pay grade to try to go in and write up a plan. And I think that there are people who have made professions out of studying how these schools need to be built, how the education will occur within these buildings, and what we need to do. When we talk about the amount of money that's been spent on them thus far, I think the lowest number I've heard here is $68 million for refurbishment of schools, which is not always that cost effective. And when we're talking about a minimum of $68 million, really $250,000 for a consultant, let's put it in perspective.
Okay, and that's time also. Does anybody want to rebut on this one? All right, the next question goes to Mr. Hepner first, and it's not on budget. With book banning efforts and the Moms of Liberty showing up in more and more Connecticut towns, including my own, if this occurred in Weston, what would your guidance be on how the Board of Ed should handle it?
What I would say to the Board of Ed would not just be to the Board of Ed, but to the entire community, and that is this. If you're going to try to restrict what your kids read, and you're paying attention to books, and you're not paying attention to these things, you have lost your mind. This is where the threat is coming. And by the way, I have friends on both sides of the political aisle. If you're concerned about free speech and trigger warnings on books that might offend and hurt people because it features terrible things like harm, if you're on the conservative side of this debate, it's the same concern. We want to raise children who are able to do critical thinking, who are able to examine diverse things and make their own decisions. What we want to keep them safe from are videos that instruct them about self-harm, are videos that are amplifying violence happening around the world, videos that actually sow misinformation all the time. So until we get serious about these devices, that's on school buses, that's in our classrooms, that's in our community. And by the way, this doesn't just go for them. Ask yourself this question. If I asked you right now to take out your cell phone, to look up the rate of anything about how cell phones are monopolizing our kids' attention spans, would you get sucked into a text message instead? Would you get sucked into an email instead? Would you get sucked into a social media post? They hijack our attention spans. They bring lots and lots of challenging things into our environment all the time. Now, I'm not just trying to vilify technology. Peter and I have talked about this at length. We have to embrace technology, but technology used in the right ways. Now, I know this sounds like I'm talking about tech. It's relevant to texts, too. We should not be banning books, folks. Neither side. If you want to keep Death of a Salesman in the curriculum, if you're more conservative about the kind of things we read, historical, text from the founding fathers, text from the Western canon, if you also want to bring in books that reflect how the world looks right now, the place to try to restrict information is not in the books, folks. It's here. So get serious about these. Don't bother with the books. That's what I would say.
All right, Mr. Guido.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Happily. With book banning efforts and Moms of Liberty showing up in more and more Connecticut towns, if this occurred in Weston, what would your guidance be on how the Board of Education should handle it?
Thank you for that. Look, some of what Chad said, I absolutely agree with. Technology can be a force for good, but as you know, that obviously can be a huge problem and detriment to our children, right? Social media especially, I think. Now, there's no doubt that there is a positive impact on the communication that it provides, but it also brings in a risk into the house. So I agree with that. I will note on the issue of book banning, I have not heard one comment. I have listened to a lot of Board of Ed meetings, and believe me, there's a lot of time in those meetings. I have not heard one comment on book banning. Now, what I will say about this is that we should not ban books on either side. This should not be a super consideration for us at this point. We need to pay attention to technology, as Chad said. I agree with that, Chad.
Time, sorry.
Thank you.
It's time.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gordon.
So I introduced myself as the engineer on the Board of Ed, but what I have in front of me is Prometheus. Prometheus, I read when I was a little kid, and it's tough because we don't want to ban books. We're pro-reading in this town, and the Prometheus gave intellect and fire to the people, and we can't bound them. So that's my liberal arts balance to my engineering mind. That's it.
Mr. Gutman.
Yeah, I think I'll just reinforce that simply. So a lot of these texts have, I feel, made me, or put me on the path that I've been on, which has been a good outcome. A lot of very successful people I know love some of the books that I've heard are considered being possibly banned, and I'm totally. We need to keep these books in our schools.
Mr. Esses.
Let me read something to you. It has to do with the Weston Portrait of Graduates. This is something that takes place when our seniors are getting ready to graduate. Weston's graduates will have the necessary knowledge, skills, and attitudes to achieve their personal goals, make positive contributions to society. The areas in which Weston graduates must demonstrate their mastery include critical thinking, communications, problem solving, creativity, caring for self, and caring for others. Book banning has no place in our community.
Ms. Ferraro?
I think that we're all in agreement here. I haven't heard anybody say that book banning is something that they want to do. However, that being said, on social media, I have seen it creeping into town. I have seen on some of the sites lists posted from the Moms of Freedom saying, be really cautious of these books. You might want to be careful about your kids getting these books out. That's fine. That's freedom of speech. I don't want somebody telling me what books my children can read, and in turn, I won't tell them what books their children can read on either side of the spectrum. That's as a mom. As a board member, I agree with what Steve said. Critical thinking. If we don't allow children to read whatever interests them, how are we ever going to be able to develop critical thinkers in this community? So, no to book banning.
All right, Mr. Felton.
So I always, when I hear questions, I always try to think of what the basis of the question is beyond the actual written word. And the first thing I'll say is I've heard this whisper campaign going around Weston that the Republicans are going to ban books. And this is the first time I've heard anything politically affiliated when it comes to the Board of Ed. And I can assure you, there's no campaign to ban books in Weston by the Republicans, and I've heard none by the Democrats either. So I think we first need to clear up any kind of confusion or misinformation about that. As far as banning books go, I can tell you that as a current Board of Ed member, one book has been banned prior to my joining the Board of Ed, and it was Death of a Salesman. And I asked, why would you ban Death of a Salesman? And the response I got was, because it, paraphrasing, it triggered the high schoolers. And we felt there were better books that would provide a similar experience, and so we banned it. I think the question of banning books really comes down to parental involvement and where the school usurps parental control. We're not banning books, but I think it has to be discussed with the community. What do we as parents see as in our best interest of our children?
Okay, I'm afraid. I hate to do this to you guys because these answers could have gone longer. But it's time. Does anybody want to rebut on this question? All right, thank you all.
Can I just add one comment?
That will count
For
as
10
your one
seconds.
rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Because I think
Go
the
for it.
parents and the town needs to know, and this particularly shout out to Sharon and Melissa, we approved the new bullying policy, and it's directly related to this, right? So we're very protective of our kids. And I think that it reflects maybe the underlying nature of that question, that we're not going to open the can of worms so our kids can be subjected to bullying.
All right, thank you. Anybody else on this? Okay, this next one goes for Mr. Guido first. What plans do you have to assess learning loss in our students? How much of the negative impacts on education have been caused by the COVID pandemic, and how much by other factors?
Could you repeat that one more time,
Yes.
please?
What plans do you have to assess learning loss in our students? How much of the negative impacts on education have been caused by the COVID pandemic, and how much by other factors?
Interesting question. When I take a look at the student outcomes here in town, the rankings of the school, as we stated before, those have continued to go down. Now, they've continued to go down not since COVID, but those trends have continued or have begun since before COVID. So I think the question is, how do we go about assessing, right, whether we are either misallocating resources, how we are measuring impact of our investments for those students, and where we can best optimize our investments going forward. I obviously, as a newcomer here, haven't been involved intricately in this, but I would say, look, you need an action plan, right? You need to determine how we're investing, where we're investing, and whether that's being optimized. Clearly, it's not. There have been discussions around, of course, as to whether or not, as test scores go down and investment or costs go up, whether or not we're too top-heavy on the administration side. Now, I've heard comments before down the dais here that we are not. I don't know that for a fact, but I'd love to dig in, of course, to find out what exactly is going on and where we can best invest and get the best ROI for the taxpayers of the town, of course, and drive the best outcomes for our students. Thank you.
Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the board just went through, as Mike said, quite a long meeting on assessing last year's goals and setting this year's goals. And a lot of it had to do with math, ELA, and science, and then the performing arts, technology, HR, and finance. But let's focus on student performance. Yes, we invested ESSER money into intervention at different grade levels. I think Sharon and I both asked sort of the administration, what was that return on investment? And it's hard to gauge, but we probably helped stem the tide a little bit due to absenteeism during COVID. And then we realized two things. One is we have to stem absenteeism going forward. It's probably the hardest problem to solve right now is among the staff and the students is absenteeism, a lot of lost learning. And the second is we put in CILs, a full plan, and that drives excellence down to the classrooms to the kids' benefit.
Mr. Gutton?
So a lot of people in town have been asking me, I don't even always have the answers yet, but I've been hearing, are we too top-heavy with administrators? And it sounds like the answers I'm getting thus far is we've got a lot. I want to believe that this district would never put a person in place who wasn't needed, but my bottom line is if you're going to invest, as I said before, and as many are saying, it needs to be first in teachers and programming. too many administrators can mean too much red tape.
Mr. Esses?
So we hold the so let's get a little history here. We have a new administration that's 2 years old. They inherited the previous administration. The Board of Education has totally turned over the senior members of administration over the last couple of years. And this board, the members of the current board, are holding the superintendent and her team and the principals to a very high standard. And they've set that standard out. I would encourage all of you to look at our most recent Board of Education meeting this past week, where they set these standards out school by school. And that's how they're going to be evaluated. And they're going to be evaluated not only on test scores, but there'll be a more subjective evaluation as well. It's important, but I by no means, and we'll get back, this is the very first question, by no means do we have a deficient school system and we're educating our children poorly. That's just totally incorrect.
Ms. Ferraro?
So, first of all, learning loss was a global issue. It wasn't just in Weston where it took place. So I want to put that out there, and I want to let you know that we are addressing it as a board. I do have to say, though, I heard one of the numbers that was thrown out about the ranking of our school system in the state of Connecticut was something like 13th. We were ranked, at the beginning of this year, we were ranked 3rd by the U.S. News and World Report, and then I went to check it again after seeing that, and it was moved to 6th. Don't know why, but I've never seen 13th. So, that being said, we are addressing the learning loss through the creation of our curriculum instructional leaders, that's SILs for those of you who are not acronym friendly from the school board. And what they're doing is they're making sure that children, their needs are identified, both social, both academic as well as social emotional, and they are making sure that the needs are being addressed so that any learning loss that we experienced from COVID is being taken care of. Again, like Steve said, I would encourage you all to go take a look at the most recent board meeting and the goals that we have going forward. And you'll see that our test scores are not going down. They are not failing.
Okay. Mr. Felton?
So I think it was Brendan who said correctly so. Our test scores did not decline during COVID. They were declining going into COVID. And COVID just sped up and put a spotlight on it. And through funding from the state called ESSER, we were able to hire interventionists, which basically is tutors, to try and make up for that lost learning. But that trend was occurring before COVID. So what we need to be doing is looking at when we spend money educating our children, what is the academic return on the investment? Why are our students scoring lower now than they were 5 or 6 years ago? It's not unique to Weston, it is with all the towns around us, but we should not be using COVID as the crutch or the excuse. Something is going on, it's complex, it'll take time to resolve, but we are aware of it, and we are holding the administration and the educators accountable to turn that trend around.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hefner?
Sure, the question is how are we going to assess this learning loss? I would also say how are we going to address it? So the first thing to keep in mind, the variation that we're talking about these test scores, because of the size of the population, total numbers, and the amount we're talking about of a drop or not, it's tiny, folks. And let's say, reverse it. Let's say we had seen improvement to the exact fraction we're talking about. I also would not say we should sit up here and pat ourselves on the shoulders. The way to assess any kind of learning loss that we have experienced is by doubling down on good, qualitative, immersive education that is not about testing our kids with NWEA 4 times every single year, and if we get a 1% increase, patting ourselves on the back. No. Keep in mind, our kids are going to graduate into a world in which creativity and entrepreneurialism are probably the 2 most powerful things they can do. Raise your hand if you think coding is a safe profession anymore. Raise your hand if you think legal is a safe profession anymore. So if you want to watch the meeting this week, as everyone's been suggesting, which you should, look at the district goals. They're good. They're sound. But we have to be much more robust about how we're evaluating those goals. They can't just be quantitative measurements. And that's how we would assess learning loss
Okay.
and address it.
I'm afraid that's time on this. Does anybody wish to rebut on this question? All right. The next question starts with Mr. Gordon first. Are you satisfied with the level of school security at the elementary and middle school? If not, what changes should Weston make?
That's a great question. So, first, I'd like to thank Mike, because I think him bringing public comment is an integral part of our role to listen to the public and confer amongst ourselves and take in all that information. Frank made a great point. Clearly an experienced person who has a lot to bring on it, so does our police force. So right now, we do have a safety and security plan. You can see now I use a lot of props. It's very comprehensive. We have a great man, Joe Rios, who is running our non-police-based security. You know, we do our homework. We go to the Homeland Security. They have an assessment that we follow. We have a K through 12 security guide that's very layered. So we're cognizant of the risks, and we're receptive to the inputs. And the inputs so far say what we're doing is very satisfactory. And clearly, with other resources on campus, we're probably better off than we thought we were 6 months ago. So there's been a lot of study, a lot of investment. I think the police department can advise us wisely, and I think the administration and the board will heed their advice. And if it comes to adding resources at the HES and WIS, that's what we'll have to do. But right now, I think the administration and the board as a whole are satisfied and very secure in our thinking on school security.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gutman?
So I believe we already have excellent security, but that school resource officers are certainly necessary. I learned from Jess, over the years, and as many of you might recall, there was a lot of pushback to school resource officers, or SROs, in the upper schools. And those programs have worked out even better than expected. Enhancing school safety, also deepening the bond between Weston Police Department folks and our schools and the students, and providing a protective resource that our students can turn to in non-emergency situations and depend on should there be a crisis.
Mr. Rezis?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't So I think everyone should remember, we've had a police officer on our campus on what we used to refer to, we still refer to as the Mile of Safety. That preceded Sandy Hook. After Sandy Hook took place, we added a school resource officer, we've added a second, and we've added security guards in the school. When this question came up earlier this year about arming the school security officers, we turned to our experts, Chief Henyon and Matt Burdacki. Chief Henyon, by his background, was a lieutenant colonel in the state police. Matt Burdacki has more awards for his work with Homeland Security, Secret Service, and the FBI, and we relied on the professional expertise. And we have spent a lot of money increasing the security at our schools. Some you can see, some you can't. But we relied on the professional advice of our public safety officials.
All right. Ms. Ferraro?
So yeah, we had to rely upon the professionals, the people who study security, Secret Service, the local police department. I think we have two SROs who primarily cover the upper schools. The reason for that is because the threat for the schools in the upper schools is from inside. So these SROs are really key in making sure that they have communication with the students, they see who might be a threat, and they can address it. From the lower schools, and by the way, the SROs also cover the lower schools. From the lower schools, the threat is from the outside. So what we've done is we have hardened the perimeter. We can't go into details of exactly what we've done, but let's just put it this way. I'm a mother of a child in the school district. I have no qualm sending my children to school here. I do know that we also need to partner with the community, because 80% of the guns that are used in school shootings come from their parents' homes. So the number one thing I think we need to do, aside from what the board has already done, is work with the community, work with the parents to educate them on their responsibility as gun owners.
Mr. Felton?
So I think it's funny, it's a little bit like operator. By the time we get way down the line, it's like, what was the original question? Because hear most of the responses. Hopefully this doesn't count towards my time. I think the question that was asked is, are we doing enough at Hurlbut and WIS, considering what we've done or we are doing today at the middle school and the high school? And I think the answer is we've done a lot, but there's still more to be done. We should be doing an all of the above approach to school security, school safety. Mental health, we did that. Hardening the buildings, we did that. Crisis management intervention, where we worked with the teachers on Stop the Bleed. Where we stopped short, and we hired a school security director. Where we stopped short was, what do the towns around us know that they have an SRO in every one of their buildings? What do they know that we don't? Because we did not put an SRO in Hurlbut or West. I'm not saying as an individual we need it, but we did not go far enough to determine why the surrounding towns, determined they did need it, and we don't. And I hope that Joe Rios has the confidence and the ability to really evaluate our schools and make recommendations based on his professionalism and not on what the Board of Ed thinks is best.
Time. Okay, Mr. Hepner.
This one keeps me up at night because I have a kid in Hurlbut and a kid in Wiss. We have to remind ourselves that the chances we have in a security event at any school in this country are infinitesimally small, statistically. Problem is, the event is so horrific that the contemplation of it is completely paralyzing. So we have to prepare for the worst while also keeping things in perspective. I agree with everyone, so I'm not going to rehash it. I think we've done a good job. For those of you who did not pay attention to this issue last spring, we had a lot of dialogue about this, and some big changes were made because of it. Investment in hardening the perimeter, new security supervisor, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard things. And I've even talked to parents individually at length about this very issue. So in this situation, beyond any other, I think what you have to do is follow the data. And if you look at the data says the things we're already focusing on, safe storage, threat assessment. By the way, we talked about consultants earlier. Those two efforts came at zero cost to the taxpayers. Threat assessment training for the faculty and the administrators, as well as safe storage that we're exploring right now. So I'll stop shortly, but in general, those are my thoughts.
Mr. Guido.
Sure, thanks. David, I think you saw my answer or something. I missed it. Look, this is an important issue. It's the reason why I actually got involved, and it's the first time that I actually was had any interaction with the Board of Ed. Actually, I was one of those parents, one of those families that stood up in front of the board in April and May of earlier this year, demanding, pleading with them to understand what they were doing and why they were doing it. It was unconscionable for me that we were met with absolute silence, frankly. I don't understand the resistance to the SROs to adequately protect the students, administrators, and educators. I don't understand why we wouldn't want to leverage the success of the SRO program. I don't understand why we wouldn't want to maintain and provide a proactive stance and an effective deterrent, and why we are doing this and failing to do this while all the other surrounding towns are actually increasing protection is making us more susceptible
Time.
on a relative basis.
Sorry, that's time. Does anybody want to rebut on this one? Yes.
I'd like to rebut. Two things. The talk about the other towns having additional SROs, whether they do or not, I ask how many of those towns have their police station adjacent to the school property? How many of those towns have a crime lab with additional police officers on the school property? My guess is none. So I think that that's one point. The other thing is, for me, the #1 killer of kids in the United States today is guns, sadly. Okay? The last thing I want to do is add more guns to a school environment where young children are that could potentially be used in a negative way.
Okay, thank you. Any other rebuttal on this question?
Yeah, I'll rebut the rebuttal.
All right.
This is just like a regular meeting.
It is, it is. Yes.
That's all
If
right.
anyone watches the Board of Ed
I'm the
meetings.
chairman, I can stop it all, by the way.
Yeah.
He and I go back and forth all the time.
Yeah, I'll just simply focus on one thing that Sharon said, and Sharon and I get along great, but we have different sort of opinions, and I think we speak them. In her rebuttal was, I guess is none. I guess. We're not professionals. We shouldn't be guessing. We should be relying on the professionals, the Joe Rios, the captains, and the Board of Ed. We should be saying to Joe Rios and Captain Bردacki and Chief Henyon, what does Reading know that we don't? What does Westport know that we don't? What does Wilton know? We shouldn't be guessing. We should be asking the questions and getting the answers. We're not asking the questions because we're acting like we know them.
Time. All
I'll
right.
rebut the second rebuttal. Is that possible or not? Can you keep the daisy chain going, or is it a capped at
You
3?
haven't used your rebuttal yet, you can use
I have not
it.
used my rebuttal yet.
Go.
No. Okay. So the reason I want to mention this is because it was said, Mr. Guido, I would have felt the same exact way, by the way, if I was a parent, that the silence was unfathomable. Now, this has a lot to do, folks, with how Board of Education meetings happen. There's very clear rules about how public comment's supposed to happen. But what I will say is, even though attending those meetings must have been maddening, because if I was a parent, I would have been mad too, this process actually, in the long term, worked right. Now, David and I have talked about this. We have to get better at how we manage public communication with the parent community. We do, absolutely. And we're working on that slowly. But the process about violence changed. We took resources in from the community about safe storage,
Time.
and also about threat assessment and other stuff. I'll stop.
There's the time, sorry. All right. Any other rebuttals? All right, I have a question for the league. I know we were supposed to end at 12, but do I have time to go with one more question before closing statements? I can do that? All right, I would like to ask this. There are other good questions, but I don't want to take it too late past when we were promised to finish. This one will start with Mr. Gutman first. If you were to increase one area of the school budget, what would it be? What one area, if any, would you decrease?
Yeah, so I think I referenced it already earlier when we were talking about the school buildings, and I'll just say it again. The most important investment we can make is, again, it's all about our children, but it's, in order to do that, it's teachers and programming. Again, without those elements, the buildings mean nothing.
All right, Mr. Esses?
This may sound odd, but I totally agree with you. Where we need to spend additional money, if money was available, is providing the best educational opportunity we can for our students. And frankly, I think we run a very tight budget. I don't know where I would reduce it. 85% of the budget is people. We have quality educators. We have people that have served this community for 10, 15, 25 years, 40 years in our superintendent. And I'm very comfortable with spending additional money, if need be, on what goes on inside the buildings.
Ms. Ferraro?
This is a tough one because I'm going to agree with the other two. I want to maximize the dollars spent in having a direct effect on the children. So obviously, I'd love to have more reading specialists. I'd love to have more psychologists who can do assessments on children and identify needs, especially for the young children who are coming to us with minimal preschool experience. And a lot of these deficits haven't been, I hate to refer to it as a deficit, but they've not been identified yet, learning deficits. So I wish that we could have additional people that would, additional staff that would help the children. As far as areas in which we could cut, we ask them to cut every year. And so, I don't particularly see, I think that, like Steve said, we run a tight ship. I don't see areas in particular where we could cut.
Mr. Felton?
So in a departure from all my other answers, I agree with everybody here. When we do the budget, well, you're kind of new, so.
Oh, okay.
When we do the budget, we are unbelievably lean, and we're looking at where can we decrease. And again, it goes back to every dollar we spend should go to directly educating our students. So I don't know that there's any place easy to answer right now about where we can increase or decrease, but I think it's a question that's worth sitting down with the superintendent and basically asking her, if you had to look at the budget and look at how many of the dollars we spend directly educating our students, what additional money would you want to have better outcomes? Similarly, if we look at every dollar we spend just on the administration and the dollars that don't go directly to educating our students, where would you cut? I don't think that question's ever been asked in that way. We do run a very, very lean budget.
All right, Mr. Hepner?
Yeah. If any of you tuned into the must-see viewing event that is school board meetings, the first time I attended a school board as a board member, you would have seen that I was the one grilling the administration about a $300,000 line item for new tablets. Now, again, I'm not going to be the zealot about technology up here, but I do think you can take a fine-tooth comb through some of these things and look for where we can trim, but there has to be a methodology to it. There's one very simple one, it's called the SAMR, S-A-M-R. I don't have time to explain the acronym in a 30-second answer, but it basically means, is the thing you're putting in place redundant? Is it better? Is it much better? Or is it transformative? So when you think about places to trim educationally, we should be looking at what is the purpose. I do think there's incremental places. I don't think actually K through 2 kids need Chromebooks as an example. That would be one place. But I agree with everybody else up here, which is it's not with salaries, it's probably not with personnel, and I don't think it's with the SILS program, which when I have time in my closing statement, I'll tell you what a SIL is.
Mr. Guido?
Yeah, very simply, far be it from me to disagree. I agree with everyone up here. Look, I would be investing in areas that drive student outcomes. That's with educators. I would also, of course, consult the superintendent and the educators in town. Understand sort of where there are potential, let's say, nice to haves that can further drive or elevate, let's say, student outcomes. As far as what I would cut, not sure. I would absolutely take a look at the administrative expenses for sure, especially in light of sort of enrollment issues. And so, is there something there that can be done where we can actually, either save money or reallocate that to programs or educators that can further drive student outcomes?
All right, Mr. Gordon?
Thank you. I'm the caboose here, but again, the engineer is talking, so we are going to spend more money next year on facilities because we're having breakdowns at the middle school. So that's part of the capital part of the budget, not the operational part of the budget. We're just about to spend about $50,000 fixing the pumps for the pools. So anticipate more expenses in the capital budget because it's time to address deferment of maintenance and repair on our facilities. The good news is that there are methods to enhance education and save operational expenses. Let me do enhancement first and 15 second and operational expenses second. So I went out, of course, another prop, and I got us some DoD educational money for our middle schoolers and high schoolers who like programming and want to learn about how to build a semiconductor chip, because the CHIP Act gives public schools free money for education. So let's call that a way of saving money but not spending money. I'm going to take 5 more seconds because I'm going to talk about sustainability and electrical savings, because that's where we're going to save energy costs and repair costs on facilities.
That is definitely time. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we now get to closing statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes. Excuse me. By luck of the draw, we're starting at the top again. Mr. Esses, you go first.
That means I'm number 1, huh?
Well, that's how you drew.
Thank you very much. I've had the privilege of serving on Weston's Board of Finance for 10 years and Westport's Board of Finance for the 10 years prior to moving to Weston. An opportunity arose to be considered for a vacancy on the Board of Education, and I opted to be considered for that vacancy. I was interested because, as Tony Pesco said last week on why he's interested in serving on the Board of Selectmen, I have experience, I have dedication, and I also have the bandwidth. And now that I'm a member of the board, it's been the highlight of my public service. 3 events impressed upon me the importance of the role and decisions we make as members. The day before school began, there was an event for all members of the Weston schools, teachers, principals, SROs, security officers, bus drivers, everyone engaged in our children's educational experience. And there were awards for service, 10, 15, 20, 25 years of persons dedicated to Weston's children. Being invited to the event where the middle school 8th graders are recognized as they begin their journey of their education into the high school, the eloquence and humor of these speakers impressed me, wanting to make certain their next 4 years will make them even more eloquent and even funnier. And lastly, as the chairman of the board, I had the privilege to greet and hand diplomas to the graduating seniors. This was an experience which cannot be described. The smiles, the laughter of the graduates, looking out at their family and friends, this summed it up. Being a member of the Board of Education, we're in the unique position of making certain Weston's children receive an excellent education in a safe and nurturing environment to prepare them to be citizens of the world. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this very important aspect of the lives of Weston's children. It's a responsibility and it's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ferraro?
Mine is short and sweet, but I do want to apologize for not having nearly as many visual aids as Peter did. So thank you, Peter, for that. That was really great. My husband and I have 6 children in our blended family. 4 of our 6 children will, hopefully, be Weston High School graduates. Fingers crossed, I still have one in there. I bring not only the perspective of a Western parent, but also of a parent who has been in multiple educational settings with children in both the public and private sector. That perspective is unique to this board. I moved to Weston just as a new superintendent began, and I think it's been referenced here. I was very much, what happened then, I was very much a fan of the district, but as an observer over this time, I noticed what seemed to be a decline in our outcomes. I decided to get involved. I'm happy to say that as I started on the school board, a new superintendent began. I've grilled her on more than one occasion about her plan for the district, and must say that based upon what I've been told, and most importantly, what I've seen over the past 2 years, she's doing exactly what needs to be done to hold people accountable and hold educators accountable, to make sure that our outcomes are what we need them to be, and to ensure that Weston continues to be a top performing school. I consider myself to be a volunteer, not a politician. I'm really bad at being a politician. And in my view, there's no place for politics when it comes to educating our children. That is one of the reasons why I think it's important that the Board of Education understands the importance of collaborative conversation and working together to make sure that ultimately the outcome for our children is the benefit. And again, just like Steve said, I've been on the board for the last 2 years. This is my first foray into any sort of politics. I have really enjoyed my time on the board. I was shocked at how much work it required. It requires a lot of work, a lot of reading, but I'm honored to have been a board member for the last 2 years, and I hope to be a board member for another 4.
Thank you. Mr. Felton?
So the closing statement is, to drum up support for us as individuals and then us as a group. So there are a bunch of things I've thought about over the past 2+ years I've been on the Board of Ed, and issues, we're gonna address issues as the Board of Ed as they come to us, but there's 4 issues that are important to me, and I'm hoping that at least 1 or 2 of them resonate with each of you. Community involvement, and I made notes just to make sure I didn't forget to say anything. The vast majority of the deliberations the Board of Ed does today is in executive session. And if you haven't noticed that, attend a regular Board of Ed meeting. We need to change that. We need to start having dialogue representing you in public, not in executive session. Quantifiable academic outcomes. We talked a lot tonight or today about the declining test scores. Why is that happening? Who is going to hold the administration accountable? How are we going to turn that around? School safety, clearly a hot topic still. I think that was the only area that was rebutted numerous times. Over the summer, we hired a school security director, Joe Rios. We also took initiatives to harden the schools and the things I talked about earlier, but more needs to be at least considered. And so I want to make sure that Joe Rios is doesn't have his hands tied behind his back because the Board of Ed 4 or 5 months ago said, this is what we're going to do, and it's enough. I want Joe Rios to have the freedom to ask questions, get with the chief, get with the captain, find out what more we can be doing, and yes, dig in on why we don't have SROs in the middle, at Hurlbut and the intermediate school. And the last one is capital improvements. That's gonna be the biggest one that affects every single person in this room, whether you have a child in the district or not. In the next 2 years, the Board of Ed is gonna come to you and ask you for anywhere from $84 million to $120 million if things progress the way they look today. Can you afford that? Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hefner?
Sure, we've talked a lot about budget and constraints and dropping test scores and things like that. I don't feel necessarily that you all have gotten a big insight into what's happening inside the 4 walls of these schools. So I'm gonna do that for a second, and I'm gonna highlight 2 things, by the way, that are getting better since 2016. The impression you might have that everything is doom and gloom, it's not true. Things are percolating and things are going in a very good direction in some places, for sure. So the reading curriculum, by the way, this is both state level, but also some revolution happening across the country. We previously weren't teaching our kids how to read all that well, in large part because we'd shifted away from decoding words and phonics. The administration has looked through 7 different kinds of reading curriculum. After vetting them thoroughly, they settled on one. We're rolling that out K through 2 the next year. So the kids' reading program is in a better direction. I preview what SILs are. It's confusing people because it's an acronym with a soft C sound, C-I-L-S, which means Curriculum Instruction Leaders. So basically, we're taking some of the best teachers, putting them in the classroom to serve as coaches for other teachers. These are some exciting things that are happening, which attend the meetings if you want. They're long, I get it, but there are some very cool things that are happening that you should know about. Now, that dovetails a little bit into what I think can be some overarching themes for what guides us next. And I'm going to flag what Peter said earlier, which is the notion of sustainability. I don't mean that in a limited sense of like recycling and composting, but that's important. But our kids are going to be living through a time in which we can help them participate in a revolution in terms of how the economy functions globally. You can make concrete. In 2 years, this could be approved for a specific company. You can make concrete for those builders out there out of gypsum, 40% less expensive than concrete, 3 times as strong. I'm not an engineer. Peter could talk about that, not me. But my point is this. We're going to have chances if we think about our school being the most innovative district in the country, not Connecticut, in the country. We're going to have chances to make these schools revolutionary, and it's going to put this idea of test scores as a single way to evaluate a student in the dust, which it already kind of is.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Guido?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. The Board of Ed plays a vital role in Weston. As the first person in my family to graduate from college, I'm aware of the importance of education, the world it can open to a young mind intellectually, as well as its ability to transform someone's life economically. In the coming years, the board has a number of important issues to address that will impact Weston's students, parents, and you, its taxpayers. First, the board must address, of course, we've talked about this before, some worrisome trends around declining student test scores, as well as the precipitous drop in the school's district rankings from number 4 to actually number 15. Second, the board must also consider capital improvements related to the school campus that are taking far too long and cost way too much, all while the facilities go unaddressed. While the aforementioned are important, it's critical to address both school security and the Board of Ed transparency, which I believe are foundational to the success of Weston School District. First, security. I can think of nothing more important than ensuring the safety of our students. While I'm in support of all of the above approach, Weston has fallen short in providing its youngest students at Weston Hurlbut with the same protection as those at our upper schools, as well as students in our surrounding towns. Placing an SRO in our lower schools would build off the successful SRO program at the upper schools and cultivate trust between the police and Weston's youngest students. While the board has failed to engage in meaningful dialogue with the public, concerned parents are left wondering what the board knows that other surrounding towns do not. That leads me to my second and final critical issue regarding the lack of transparency, which was raised at the selectmen debate as being critical, hard to navigate, and yet suboptimal. Unfortunately, this afflicts the Board of Ed as well, as it leaves items off the agenda, reserves decision-making for executive session, and refrains from robust public dialogue. But I believe dialogue and debate are not dysfunctional. That the board should represent the interests of the students, parents, and residents, not any administration, and that discussion should be default open, not privileged or confidential.
And I'm afraid
Transparency,
that's time.
last sentence, transparency is the foundation of a well-functioning town. I believe that together we can do better, and we can deliver better outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Gordon?
Thank you for letting me have a closing statement, and we're going to do a little bit of audience participation, so I'll explain that in a second. Let me read just one sentence. So myself and our collective board, it's a great responsibility to ensure student achievement and proudly prepare students for the challenges and opportunities of 21st century citizenship and careers while meeting our fiduciary responsibilities. So we have a great responsibility, and we take it very seriously. Here's a little less serious way I'm going to end my debate today. Anyone an NCAA basketball fan? Raise your hands. A few, right? So we began a debate with maybe we're in the Sweet 16, maybe. Math, maybe we're in the Elite 8, right? We heard we're third best high school in Connecticut. We're in the Final Four. But that's not enough. We expect more from ourselves, our administrators, our students, our parents, our teachers. What are we in it? We're in it to win it, right? So what do we want to get out of a functioning board and a good budget and parental involvement and smart kids. We want to have Coach B cut down the nets, right? That's what we want. We want to be the champion. So that's my NCAA analogy towards why we do what we do, the skill that you have in front of you. All of us contribute in different ways. You know how I contribute, and thank you for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Gutman?
Wow, I guess I'm the closing closer.
Yes, sir.
This was fun. I actually enjoyed this. So thank you all, and thank you again to the Weston League of Women Voters for hosting today. Mine is very simple and brief. In closing, I want to reinforce that school safety needs to remain a top priority. I will work closely with our police commissioner and commission to continue that mission. We also need stronger school-parent partnership and collaborative Board of Education leadership. I will get more parents involved so there is proper representation at Board of Ed meetings. Westonites expect more. We're going to give it to them.
All right. On behalf of the league, once again, I would like to thank everybody who submitted questions, whether we actually got to ask them or not. I have been requested to ask both the panelists and the members of the audience that if you want to follow the debates and the candidates' positions further, there is a League of Women Voters website, LWVWestonCT.org. There will be material there, including a 2023 voters guide, the debate recordings as they become available, and other material about the town and about the league. I strongly recommend that you use it if you want it. On behalf of the league, my profound thanks to all the candidates.